let's start without wasting a minute so that you can get some more time to cover your sessions, right? So you can speak more on that if you want. Fair enough. So Julia Pottinger is from Jamaica, and she is actually into a training and development manager at QualityWorks with expertise in manual, automated, and API testings. And she has also helped companies in training to enhance their quality softwares, to improve test coverage, faster time to market, increase process efficiencies, and optimize the use of the resources. And she is passionate about sharing her knowledge and experience and contribute towards the testing community through writing articles and delivery testing contents on test automations, university as well through her YouTube channel and a blog. She also conducts testing boot camps for a person interested in entering the field of a QA. So that's great, Julia. It's nice to know you, and it's over to you, Julia.
All right. Hi, good morning. Well, it's probably evening for most persons. It's morning for me. So, hi, everyone. I hope we're doing okay. And I hope we are feeling okay with everything that has been going on. Let me just pull up my slides really quickly and start to share my screen. So, that's the wrong one. Are you seeing my presentation or are you seeing my desktop?
We are able to see your presentation, Julia.
Okay, great. So today we're going to be talking about how you can create an effective test automation strategy. Now, a test automation strategy becomes really important when it is that we want to do test automation for our different projects. So we have decided that we're going to automate something on our project, but we have no idea what the tools are that we're going to use to automate it. We have not talked about what the return on investment that we're going to get from that automation is, a lot of things. So being able to create that proper test automation strategy that is going to go through all the different things and highlight the important facts that we need to know is really important. So just an introduction, I am Julia Pottinger, as was said before. I am currently the training and development manager at QualityWorks Consulting Group. I train persons on testing and software quality. So if it is that persons are interested in becoming testers, I ramp them up. I also train persons on doing test automation, particularly in WebDriver IO. I have a course on Test Automation University if you're interested in checking that out. You can find me at iluj876 on Twitter, and I have a YouTube channel where I talk about WebDriver IO as well as topics like CSS locators, how to create an test automation strategy, how to advance your career by being an effective agile QA. So I have a lot of topics on my YouTube channel, and you can find that at youtube.com/Julia Pottinger. So today we're going to do two things. We're first going to define what an automation strategy is, and then we're going to walk through creating one. So to me, an automation strategy is that overall plan that a company has. So a regular test strategy is going to cover who is going to do it. It's going to have some form of timeline. It's going to have some resource breakdown, some risks. It's going to list the tools that you're going to use like Jira, and if it is that you're using test rails for test case documentation. So similarly, a test automation strategy is that plan that everyone on your team should understand. It doesn't work well if it's not an entire team buy-on. So that team needs to understand how that test automation strategy is going to work, how it's going to be implemented, and how it affects them. So once it is that you have your test automation strategy, you're going to ensure that it's fulfilling the need that you want. And you're going to do that by answering some questions, such as why it is you want to do test automation. How are you planning on doing test automation? Who is going to be writing the code? Who is going to be running the code? Who is going to be reading the reports that come from the code? And where will that code be running? Is it going to be locally? Is it going to be in a CI pipeline? All of those questions are going to ensure that the return on investment, the time, the money, the resources, the people that you put to create your test automation, you get back that return, such as your test being reliable, not being flaky. You have your products going out much faster, and you can do this in a way that is repeatable. So that's the purpose of the test automation strategy, and that's some of the questions that it should answer. So the first thing when you're creating a test automation strategy, if it is that your company or someone approaches you and like, I want to start doing test automation, you have to first answer the question of why. And that is, what is the goal for you writing automated tests? Because automated tests can be almost a separate development project, because you have to ensure that you write your code properly. You have to ensure that you select the correct tools and frameworks. You have to ensure that your code is maintained, because if your code isn't maintained, that means that you will be having failures, and those failures can result in false positives and things being missed. So why do you want to write automated code? What do you want to get? For some persons, this reason is that they want to deliver quality software faster. And by delivering quality software faster, this could mean that it handles a lot of the repetitive tests that persons have to do manually. So I have been on projects where it was thousands of test cases that we would have to go through manually for each release cycle. So we had a 2-week sprint, and every 2 weeks we were releasing. During the time that we were releasing, we would have to go ahead and do a lot of manual regression, checking that you can do payment in Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, checking that you can order products, checking that you can order different combination of products, checking that it works in US, or checking that it works in Canada. A lot of different manual checks that takes 1 to 2 days, depending on if we have our full team of 3 persons. Now, if we had a goal to deliver quality software faster and handle lots of repetitive tests, then test automation could be effective, as it would allow us to run regression without having to do all of those scenarios. So if we had that goal, then test automation would provide us with a good return on investment, because it would allow us to save time and effort. So instead of going and manually running those thousands of test cases, we could have the test automation run before the release, and while we focus on the new features that are going out in the sprint, and maybe do some smoke tests. And then once it is we get the results of the automation, then we would analyze those results and decide whether or not we need to do further testing on certain features based on that. Now, there are other goals of automation, such as improving processes and workflows. Let's say the team has no unit tests, so therefore the bills that have been coming over, they were not up to a certain standard. They had bugs. So therefore, you want the team to start implementing some unit tests that is going to go into a CI pipeline that runs against any new build that is coming over, so that the builds that QA get, the builds that go out to production, they are going to be run against those unit tests, or it could be API tests or UI tests. Whatever it is, improving that process flow just to ensure that there are certain criteria that the code has to meet before it gets deployed. And some persons just want to close the sprint with automation in place. So they may have some automation already, but they are behind. So they are maybe 5 sprints behind in terms of the automation that they are writing. So the new features that were created in the last 5 sprints, they probably weren't automated. And so they want to be able to have those features automated. This is also a goal that persons may have for doing test automation. And so they would need to increase the size of their team, add on automation engineers to compensate for the time that is going to take to write these automated tests. So first, you need to identify the goal, because the goal of why you're doing test automation helps to drive everything else. It helps to tell who is going to do it, how you're going to do it, the tools you're doing it. So you need to first identify the why. After identifying the why, you can then start identifying the who. So who is going to write the automated code? Who is going to run it? Who is going to analyze the results? And most importantly, who is going to be maintaining that code? Now, you may have developers who are going to write your unit test, or in some cases, there are tools that allow developers to be more involved in writing some front-end automation. And you may just have a team of developers. There are companies that do not yet have enough persons on their staff to have a dedicated QA engineer. So they may have developers that may write tests from time to time. You may also have manual testers that you want to shift from doing only manual testing to doing some form of automation. And then you may have a mixture. So you may have a mixture of developers, manual testers, and automation engineers. Whatever that mixture is, you need to ensure that these persons have the adequate time to do test automation. I have been on projects where we have started out doing manual testing, but we always knew that we were supposed to do test automation as well. However, we didn't have the time to do it. So therefore, we had to be prioritizing new features that are going out each release. And then you'll have someone come and be like, oh, we need to start doing some test automation. And the question then becomes, are we getting a new team member to aid in this new test automation that we should be creating? And a lot of times it hasn't been thought about. It's like your time needs to be split to still do manual testing and then do test automation on top of that. So it's very important for you to, in creating your strategy, think about how that time is going to work. Do you currently have enough persons on your team to do manual testing effectively and start an automation project? Automation takes time, it takes resources, and it takes time to also maintain the automation code. So think about how it's going to be maintained, not just how it's going to be created. So ensure that all the persons on your team will have the time. Ensure that you have a certain budget, because there are certain tools that cost, and then you have to pay the persons that are going to be writing the code and maintaining the code as well. Now, the third thing, after you've decided why you're doing test automation, or you have decided who is going to do it, you've identified some time, you've identified some budget, and you've identified some people. and you've said, okay, these are the persons, they have a certain skill set, they know certain languages, they are familiar with maybe a particular framework. You now need to start talking about what it is you're going to be automating, because you can't automate everything. Just like how exhaustive testing is impossible, exhaustive test automation is also impossible. It is not advised that you go out and you start to automate all of your manual test cases. You need to evaluate the levels and the types of tests. So when we talk about levels of testing, we normally tend to follow the testing pyramid, where it talks about the unit test being the base. And by being the base, this means that these tests are easier to write and faster to run, therefore giving you much quicker results. It also indicates that you should have more unit tests than you have UI tests, as the UI tests are at the top of the pyramid. So when we talk about having more unit tests, that means that you're going to involve your developers. So you're going to need developers to write code. And based on that, they may write it in a particular language that the framework, that the application is being developed in. So if the application is being developed in Java or Python or JavaScript, then the test automation framework may be chosen from one of those languages. Then we talk about the service layer. Service layer has to do with API and database testing. It's kind of the connecting portion between the unit layer and the UI layer. You do have a good amount of service layer tests, but not as much as the unit layer. And they do still run faster than UI tests. I have found that when I write API automation, they run in milliseconds versus UI tests where it's mimicking the actions of the user on the front end. So therefore, it's going to do a click by click. You have to find locators. It takes more time to write. It takes more time to set up. It also takes more time to run, and it is more brittle. So it is advised that you ensure that the units are working properly. You ensure that the service components are also working, and that leaves you with less UI tests. You only verify critical things. So UI tests can be something driven by Selenium or WebDriver, or you now have Cypress. It can be driven by any of those tools. And you can also have something such as visual regression, where you're verifying that buttons are placed correctly, the colors are correct, the text starts in a certain spot. So you have a lot of different options. But you need to decide what level of automation you're focusing on. If you're focusing on all three, then you're going to need persons that can write test automation in all three. So if you have a unit layer test that you want to run, then you know that you'll need developers. If you have service and UI, you know that you'll need test automation engineers. Now, when we talk about the types of test cases, even though manual testers may not be ready to write test automation, they can be useful in identifying the types of test cases because they are familiar with the system. They know what the smoke tests are. They know those tests that have been headaches and taking a long time to do manually. They know the different browser combinations that they're using. They know the different operating systems that they have been testing on. So working with them to talk about what test cases would be best for test automation is important. So I have a general rule of the types of test cases that I normally automate. So smoke tests are those that have to work in order for the application to be even viable. So if it's a mobile application, it must be able to open. I must be able to log in, whether it's mobile or a web app. I must be able to make payments if it's an e-commerce application. So there are certain core functionalities of the application that if it's not working, then it doesn't make sense you even start doing any form of testing, as those issues would need to be fixed immediately. So those are some areas that you can automate because it's going to give you quick responses so that as soon as you get a build, or even if the automation is integrated to trigger once there's a build. You can get your results in no time to know whether or not the build is viable. Then we can start automating regression. Regression is going to save you a lot of time. So if one of your goals is that you want to have faster cycles, then you can start thinking about how the types of tests fit into what your goal is. If one of your goals is to have a CI/CD pipeline, then you can start thinking about what form of test cases would fit in that. So your unit tests to be triggered when there's a build, that type of thing. And then extensive tests where you have a lot of data, where you are entering forms and filling out forms and it's just really data heavy. You can automate those tests as well. And then performance testing, ensuring that multiple persons can come to your site. So stress tests, load tests, all of those are really important to automate. And then we talk about how we automate. So we have defined why we're doing test automation. So you have a goal. We have defined who is going to do the automation. So you have the team, you know their strengths, you know their weaknesses, you know the languages that they can write test automation in, you know their skill level. We have also determined what we are automating. So we've identified the test cases and the levels. Now we are defining how we're going to do that. So what tools are we going to be using? And the three things that we have defined before helps to drive the tools that we use. Because if no one on your team knows Java, then why would you choose a Java framework? If everyone on your team knows JavaScript, then you would go towards a JavaScript framework or vice versa. Or if persons on your team know Python or C or C Sharp, then the tools you're going to use may stick to that language. Also, if your code is written in a particular language, as I mentioned before, then your unit test may also be written in that language, and the tools that you choose to write your unit test would be within that language. So identifying all of those and understanding how all of those work together is really important when creating a test automation strategy. So also when you're talking about how, if one of your goals of doing test automation is to have a CI/CD pipeline, you then need to think about what the trigger is going to be. Is it that I'm going to have my test automation be scheduled where it may be run in the morning, then it runs at night, or it triggers when a new build is being made, or it triggers for some other reason? And also think about, in terms of tools, what CI/CD framework is going to work well with the language that you have and the team that you have and the types of tests that you have. So there are a lot of CI/CD tools that you can use. Circle CI, you can use Docker for your containers, you can use AWS, you can use Travis CI, you can use CodeShip. There are several tools, several frameworks, and you can automate in Selenium, with Java, with Python, with JavaScript. You can use WebDriver.io. You can use Cypress. There are so many tools and frameworks, and you need to spend the time understanding how those different tools and those different frameworks would affect how you automate and what your goal is, the skill level of your team, and the type of tests that you're doing. The next thing is where and when. So I mentioned that you could schedule your test to run in the morning or in the evening. That is a kind of popular thing to do, where before you come in the morning, you may come in and you see some results by the time you have done morning stand-up. So you have some idea of how things are still looking in production or in QA. You may also have something that runs towards the end of the day, when maybe that's where you have a lot of traffic on the site and you want to see how your performance tests are doing, if you have those automated. So Based on your goal and what you want to get out, you decide when and where you're going to automate. Whether you're going to just have it on your local machine and you just run the automation as a regression script when it is that you're doing a release, or if it's unit tests and you want them to be triggered in a build once a new feature is being added by a developer. So before the developer can merge their build into the main branch, there's going to be a trigger that runs the automated unit tests or UI tests. So you have to think about all of those different things. And then if it's API tests and database tests, do you have a QA database where testing can be done? Because there are certain tests that you don't want to run on a production database. You don't want to be deleting users and that sort of thing. So you may need different environments. You'll maybe need a QA environment to do certain tests on, such as creating multiple users and doing checkout with a fake credit card. Versus on production, you wouldn't want to do continuously be doing payment automation on production. You may do payment up to a point, but you don't go to the full checkout. There are other things on production that you can have. So you can have different tags in your automation to indicate what tests will be running on QA versus what tests will be running on production. So deciding how you're going to do that is very important within your test automation strategy. So those are some things that you need to think about when doing your test automation strategy. And we're now going to look at a demo of a mind map that you can quickly put together to highlight the goal, the how, the why, the where, the when, and the who. So this demo is inspired by Brittany Stewart. She's a consultant as well as QualityWorks, and she did a test strategy on using mind maps that I found to be really interesting. So this test automation strategy also uses mind maps. So you can find her on Twitter at British_beauty, and you can give her a follow as she talks more about mind mapping for persons that are a bit more visual and want to create their test automation strategy that way. So this is the test automation strategy, and we're going to zoom in and go through the different areas shortly. We have the automated strategy test template, and then you can have your project name. It goes into an overview, the different frameworks, the different testing type, test areas, timeline, platforms, test environment, automation, execution, code management, risk, and reporting. So we have the project name based on the different project that you are on, and then overview. Sorry. So in overview, you first frame this as the goal of the strategy. What are you wanting to achieve? So we are going to be creating unit tests to increase automated test coverage. We are going to be automating the regression test to increase a better process workflow and to reduce the amount of time that it takes to do regression. We are automating our performance tests so that we can evaluate the different performance levels of our application. So frame this in terms of the type of test and high level of what the automation strategy will have, but also include the goal. Why are you creating this test automation strategy? Why will you be going ahead to do test automation? And then automation frameworks. As I mentioned before, these are important to deciding what you're going to write. So not just think about the newest and the latest framework, but a framework that is going to work for your situation. So as I said, based on the language, based on the skill level of your team, based on if you want to pay maybe for a solution, but also ensure that the solution is going to be supported for the future. So if there are different bugs that may come up in the framework, those bugs will be fixed because the framework is being maintained. All of those things need to be taken into consideration. You don't necessarily want to use a framework that is no longer being maintained, and therefore that means that if there are errors with the framework, it won't get fixed, and you'll probably have to switch to a different framework and start writing your test automation all over again. That is going to take a lot of time. So right here you have unit, UI, and service layer. So based on the different layers that you have decided to write automation for, you can have different frameworks for those. So you enter that here. And then testing types, you can enter a high overview of the types of testing that you will be doing. So smoke, functional, regression test, whatever type, performance test, whatever type of testing that you'll be doing, you can enter that there. And then testing areas. So features that you're going to automate. Are you going to automate the authentication, login, and registration feature? Are you going to automate payments? If you're doing so, what environments are you automating them on? You can go as deep as you want to, or you can keep it as high level as you want to. It's all up to you, all up to your project. But this is like a quick, let's work through and quickly put in some things that we want to be in our test automation strategy by answering who, what, how, why, and where. And then timeline. So our timeline breakdown for the project. This can be very high level, as I said before, or you can say we want to do this in every sprint, and we're going to dedicate one person to it, and they're going to maybe take 4 hours a day to write automation. Whatever that time looks like, however long it's going to take, you enter that here. And then platforms. So if it is that you have a lot of cross-browser, cross-operating systems, different service layers, different databases, different APIs, whatever your platforms that you're going to be running your tests on, you enter those here. So we have web browsers, Chrome, Safari, Edge. We have mobile devices. You have iPhones, Samsungs. You can add any other tablets, different screen sizes here as well. Then service layers, we talk about our databases or API. If we have a QA database or something like that, or we are mocking our APIs, we can have that here as well. And then operating system, your Windows, your Mac, that sort of thing. And then test environments. When we talk about test environments, you can decide whether or not you're running on QA, staging, or production. Now, I advocate for testing in production as your customers, your users are using the application in production, and using the application is a form of testing. Once it is that they're using the application, they're going to see things that may be wrong with it. So you don't want your production environment to go down and you are not aware that it's down because you're not constantly checking it or testing for it. So not all tests can be run in production, but even certain smoke tests can be run in production based on the triggers and the schedules that you have set up. And then automation execution. Talked about this in terms of the how and the what and the when. How are you going to run your automated tests? Are you going to just run it locally, where once you run it by entering a command on your laptop, or you have it in Jenkins, so it gets triggered in the morning, or it gets triggered when it is that a new build is made? And for cross-browser, are you using a system like Sauce Labs or BrowserStack? Or do you have multiple Docker containers with Chrome and Edge, etc.? How are you going to execute cross-browser testing if it is that you want to do so? If you're doing mobile automation and you're using maybe a framework like Appium, how are you going to get those different devices? What simulators are you going to use? How will that work? So talk about how it's going to work. So how is it going to be written? When are you going to write the code? When are you going to execute the code? When are you going to evaluate the results that are coming from the code? All of those things are really important, and you can just add them here. Then we have 3 more things. Automation, code management, which is important. How are you going to store the code? Will the CI/CD system have access to it? In terms of data, will there be certain data that you need, and how will the automation code access that data? For example, your databases, how are you going to store your database logins? Should PRs be made? So should pull requests be made, and how do they go? Who decides that you can merge in your automated test code? Do you need 1 approver? Do you need 2 approver? How does that process work? What does that process look like? You have to think through all of those things. And then limitations and risks. So what are some risks that you have? Is it that you don't have enough persons? Is it that the persons that are on the team do not know how to write automated code? So you would have to take time to train them. What are the different risks that you have for this particular project? And then finally, reporting. How does reporting look? And why do you need to have that sort of reporting? What metrics are you going to measure? What metrics are you going to be reporting? And what's the purpose of the report? Is it that you want some executive level to see it that will frame how it's put together? Is it that you just want to check that the build can be deployed? Is it that you just want to check that regression meets a certain criteria? Is it that you want to check the coverage of the test automation? Whatever the purpose of reporting is, you need to understand that, decide on the tool that you want to do reporting on, and do it. Another field that could have been added here is team. So if you want to maybe specify the types of persons that you need to have on your team, whether it be 2 developers or to write the unit test, or 3 QA to write test automation, you could also add that field there. So let's do a quick recap. We talked about some things when we are creating our test automation strategy. We need to identify the goal. This is why you're doing test automation. Is it that you want to save time? You want to have continuous testing through CI? You want to close your sprint with automation? You want to reduce regression? Whatever your goal, it's going to help drive everything. Then you talk about who. Are you using developers? Are you using manual testers? Are you using automation engineer, or is it a mixture? And what are their skill levels? What do they know? What do you need to teach them? What frameworks are you using? And then what? Are you going to do mostly only unit tests for now? Are you going to do only UI tests? Are you doing a combination of UI service and unit? And why are you doing that? And are you automating performance? Are you just doing smoke? Are you doing regression? And visual testing comes into play in the UI level. What types of testing are you doing? And how does that fit back into the team that is going to do it, as well as the goal for doing it? And then we talk about how. What are you doing it in Selenium? Are you using Java with Selenium, Python? Are you using WebDriver IO? Are you using Cypress? And what and why? Will that allow your code to be easily maintained? And is it going to be using CI/CD? So you need Jenkins, or you need Travis CI, or you need GitHub Actions. What do you need in order for your code to run and run effectively? And where and when? Are you storing it on your local? Is there a particular database? Do you have QA environments? Do you have production code that is separate from your QA code, maybe in terms of the tags that are identifying them, etc.? And then creating a quick mind map to flesh out those areas in a high-level view is very useful, as you can show this to members of your team, because as I mentioned at the very start, it's important that everyone on your team understands the test automation strategy and understands their role in the test automation strategy. So if you have this mind map, you can show it to your team and you can walk through the different things that are on it and make changes and adjustments really quickly. All right, so that's it. Thank you so much for sticking with me and talking over creating an effective test automation strategy. I hope it was very valuable to you. You can follow me over on Twitter at iluge876. You can email me at jpottinger@qualityworkscg.com if you want to work with QualityWorks Consulting Group. Maybe you're looking for consultants to do test automation. And I have a blog at juliapottinger.com where I talk more about these topics, as well as on my YouTube at youtube.com/juliapottinger.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for the wonderful session, like summarizing each and every aspects of the test automation, why it was needed, what it was needed, and regarding then ROI as well. You spoke about ROI as well, which is more important, and because always an entrepreneur counts on the numbers as well. So
Yes.
thank you for the wonderful session, Julia. It was really, really, really helpful. So guys, so Julia, we have one question from Srisha, that how do we get the buy-in from the management when we have so much of automate? The common concern is that it takes more time to code than the automate the best.
So if you have the goal and why you're doing it, then you can start talking about the benefits that will get. So for example, when I'm presenting a test automation strategy, I also include the benefits. So what are you going to get from it? So is it that we're going to have better quality? Is it that I'm going to be able to get releases out faster, and that's going to save time and money? So you have to frame it in a way that is appealing to management. So even though it takes a lot of time to write automation code, we are going to be getting back this return on our investment, which is why return on investment is important. So that should always be in the conversation. And so look at the benefits for your particular situation and how that outweighs the time that takes to write test automation.
I hope Srisha, Julia have
Yeah.
answered the question.
Yes, Karthik. Thank you, Julia.
Okay.
Okay, great. Guys, do we have any other questions? Because Julia is done with the session, so feel free to ask any sort of questions you come across in terms of anything. Because yeah,
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So one question what I have is related to the legacy and modern technologies. If there is a combination of two different kinds of systems in an organization, so how do you basically suggest the automation test strategy should be, which is not covered in the slide deck, what I feel, if it is
So
a
you're
combination. Yeah.
so you're saying that some systems are legacy and there are some systems that are newer?
Yes. And modern technologies.
Yeah. So based on, I think Java is a powerful language that could possibly be used to automate both legacy and new systems. So that is something that you can look into. And there are different frameworks that can address that. So I don't know particularly the legacy system that you may have, but
Yeah.
Selenium I know is very powerful, so it should be able to handle.
I can tell some examples, like there are still certain old legacy systems are used like COBOL, okay, as well as mainframes running COBOL programs. So those kind of character user interface, CUI basically, where GUI is not yet brought because of the complexities that are involved in those legacy systems. Still they are not migrated and running in the old legacy application platforms only. So those kind of apps I'm talking about when I say legacy.
Okay. Yeah. So even if you don't have UI, are there, I'm thinking of still maybe having some unit tests, or maybe if there are APIs that you can call on or databases that you can test, even though it's legacy. So even though you may not have GUI components on it, there are still other components that you can automate, like the unit and the service layers. And then for the mothering portion, you can go ahead and focus a bit more on the UI of those.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So, Julia, one more question from Zefa. That's how feasible is it to do automation at the same time as writing the manual test cases, as this can save the time cost involved with automation?
So I hear that question a lot, and I default to it being feasible if you have the right number of persons. So if it's one person and let's say you have one person and you have 5 developers, it's not feasible. If you have one person manual testing and you have one person only writing automation, and maybe you have 2 or maximum 3 developers, then it could possibly be feasible. But you have to think about the number of QA that you have and whether or not they're dedicated to writing test automation or they're splitting their time between manual and test automation. Because if you have a lot more developers, that means a lot more features are going to be created, which means a lot more manual testing will need to be done. So if you don't have an adequate amount of testers to do manual and automated testing, it won't be feasible.
Mustafa, I hope Julia have answered your question. So we guys are running short of time because it's just 1 minute. Guys, I would request everyone to please reach out to Zifa on any of the social media platform and ask your questions. She would be able to answer it. I hope that everyone it would work for everyone. Cool. Thank you, Julia, for the wonderful time.